but we'll go ahead and get started with what is happening with the yuan. So if you had not heard, countries like China and Brazil decided to come together and put aside the US dollar. They decided to focus on their own form of currency, which is the yuan, the Chinese yuan. Now, it was just reported yesterday that apparently something really huge happened with the yuan in reference to the US dollar. Let's go ahead and get into it.
The greenback has been the mainstream reserve currency, and until recently, no one imagined that that could change anytime soon. With the Russia-Ukraine war, high commodity prices and also dwindling foreign exchange reserves have now challenged the greenback. And it is the Chinese yuan that seems to be emerging as a hot alternative for the American dollar. Our next poll gets you the details.
Here we go.
The US dollar has dominated international trade since the end of World War II. But after the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war, the greenback seems to be losing some of its sheen. De-dollarization has become the trend after several countries have expressed the need for an alternate currency to carry out trade. But the question is, why is the dollar losing popularity now? The dollar is losing its dominance after the US imposed sanctions on Russia for its war in Ukraine.
Bingo. That's a big one right there. What she just said. I want to say something really quick to Ashura. Ashura says it's Juan, like saying Wong in Spanish. No. We just had this conversation, didn't we, Eric? Eric and I just had this conversation, and notice in the video, they pronounced it Yuan. So I thought that too, but anywho, listen to what she just said. When did the dollar start to lose its power? Listen to this.
The dollar is losing its dominance after the US imposed sanctions on Russia for its war in Ukraine.
That piece right there is very crucial. So I wanted you to hear that, because I don't want you to think that the dollar is just now losing its dominance because China and Brazil decided to come together and have their own currency and not focus on the US dollar. According to this, it actually started to lose its dominance when the US government put sanctions on Russia. Remember when I told you that those sanctions that the US put on Russia was not just going to hurt Russia? Remember, I told you this just a couple of days ago as well, that it hasn't just been hurting Russia. And actually, Russia seems to be beating the sanctions in the ways the US government didn't think would happen. That it would also harm other countries like the UK, like Germany, like other parts of Europe, right? Countries that depended on that pipeline, which is now gone. But also the United States. Also the US dollar. I don't think a lot of people saw this coming. So just remember that, because what you're going to hear on mainstream media going forward is they are going to blame this on the fact that China and Brazil and other countries decided to come together and decided to put the US dollar aside and focus on yuan. But just go back to this video so you can remind yourself that it actually started to lose dominance when the US government put sanctions on Russia. Let's go on.
Cost of imports for neutral countries like India have become more expensive, especially since the US Fed started hiking borrowing rates to control inflation domestically. And it is the yuan that seems to be leading the race now as an alternate reserve currency to the dollar. For the first time in decades, the yuan became the most used currency for cross-border trade with China. That means countries trading with China are doing business in yuan rather than the US dollar.
That's huge. When we talk about trade, countries doing, except for us, of course, but countries now doing business with China, they're doing that trade through the use of yuan instead of the US dollar. Things are really changing, you guys. This is what I tried to warn people about. This is what happens when the US government wants to destroy other countries for years, for decades, wants to bully other countries for years, for decades. Eventually, those countries have two options. They can either allow themselves to be bullied and do what the US government wants them to do, or they can form an alliance of their own, kind of like the Avengers, and they can collaborate and work together against the US government. This was only a matter of time. Only a matter of time.
Given the volume of trade carried out by China, it is only natural that the government can create demand for its domestic currency. The rupee is fast emerging as another alternative reserve currency. India is one of the leading innovators in the payments landscape and is leveraging tech to make the rupee truly global.
That's another one. India is leveraging rupee, that's their currency, to make tech global. Did you ever think you would see a time when other countries would not necessarily depend on the US dollar anymore? And if you have a lot of tech businesses in India, this is a perfect way for them to go. It actually makes a lot of sense. Now, what were to happen if other countries in Europe decided to do the same thing? When we hear President Macron, and he's a little crazy, but we hear President Macron make this statement that Europe should no longer follow the US lead when it comes to some of these foreign affairs. In reference to this conflict between China and Taiwan, when you hear President Macron make a statement such as, we are not going to follow the US lead with this conflict. We are not going to go against China. Maybe Europe should be a third world power and start doing our own thing. Where else could that lead? Where else could that go? So if some of our European allies decide, we don't really want to be allies with you on this particular issue, what else would they change their mind about? And I ask this question again. When is it okay for an ally to disagree with us on a particular issue and say, we're going to take a back seat, you guys have at it? When is that okay? And if you look at this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, some would say that time is right now. Let's go on.
Several countries have started using the rupee for bilateral trade, marking a new era for economic power for the Asian giants. While the dollar is losing steam, its share in foreign reserves is well above 58%. The euro, the second most popular currency, is far behind with a 20% share in foreign reserves. And the share of the yuan and the rupee are negligible. But both China and India are ahead of the US in developing new payment systems like the central bank's digital currency and India's UPI, which completes transactions at a fraction of the cost of conventional payment methods such as SWIFT.
Let's go back to this picture here. I want you to see them shaking hands because this is a statement. Let me make something very clear. Xi Jinping has been making moves. He's been kicking ass and taking names. This guy's made more deals than businessmen that I know within the past. How many deals has he made? How many agreements has he made within the past month or so? He's made a deal with Saudi Arabia. He's made a deal with Brazil. He's made a deal with India. Who are we making deals with right now? A lot of people don't like us too much. A lot of people not too fond of the US government. I wonder why. But he is making deals. So if you see this here,
they are negligible. But both China and India are ahead.
You see, this is probably like the fourth time I've seen Xi Jinping shake hands with another foreign leader. I don't know, within the past couple weeks. He is actually the one who went to sit down with Vladimir Putin to say, okay, let's see how we can work together. Let's even talk about some type of peace negotiation. Where are we? Where is the US government when it comes to talking about a peace negotiation? Well, we found out through that leak from the Pentagon documents that the plan with Russia and Ukraine for the US government was actually not to end this anytime soon and to implement regime change in Russia. That's why you don't see us trying to make any peace negotiations. And that is to push Russia out of being a competitor. Now, why would that be? This all goes back to money. This all goes back to economics. The US government wants to continue to be the dominant world power. And when you have countries like China and Russia, given where they are right now economically, the US government sees those countries as a threat. And now you have China forming alliance with other foreign leaders to use new currency and to do their own thing. And you have BRICS. So I told you about a story recently with Professor Richard Wolff. I clipped that the other day, so it's on my channel if you just want to see the clip, where he was trying to warn people that the days of the dominant presence of the U.S. empire is starting to change. The U.S. empire is starting to fall. And this is a perfect example of it here. So China is continuing to make deals with other foreign leaders. And look, every time I see this man, he's smiling. Every time I see pictures of Xi Jinping, he seems to be smiling and just happy as can be. Everyone should pay attention to what's happening.
Head of the US in developing new payment systems like the central bank's digital currency and India's UPI, which completes transactions at a fraction of the cost of conventional payment methods such as SWIFT.
There you go.
Bureau Report, Yuan, World is One.
Yuan is
Yuan. So there's that piece. I have a little bit more information. I do want to give a little bit more detail in reference to this particular topic. Now, this was released yesterday, and I was like, oh, we have to talk about this tonight. Yuan overtakes dollar to become most used currency in China's cross-border transactions. Here it is. The yuan became the most widely used currency for cross-border transaction in China in March, overtaking the dollar for the first time. This is huge. Overtaking the dollar for the first time. That happened very quickly, didn't it? Wasn't it just in March we were talking about this agreement that they had with other countries to not use the US dollar as currency anymore? And just like that, overtakes the US dollar. Cross-border payments and receipts in yuan rose to a record 549.9 billion in March from 434.5 billion a month earlier. When I tell you this happened fast, this happened fast. The yuan was used in 48.4% of all cross-border transactions. That's almost half. Reuters calculated while the dollar share declined 46.7% from 48.6% a month earlier. That's how fast this is happening. The volume of cross-border transactions covers both the current and capital accounts. China has long been promoting the use of yuan to settle cross-border trades as part of an effort to internationalize the use of its currency. The yuan use in global trade finance remains low, though it has shown steady increases, and this is what we need to pay attention to. Sometimes the increase may not happen as fast globally, but if it's steadily increasing, you still need to keep an eye on that. Data from SWIFT showed that the yuan share of global currency transactions for trade finance rose to 4.5% in March, while the dollar accounted for 83.71%. So you got to pay attention to what is happening here. This should be huge. This should be huge news right now. Every major news outlet should be talking about this right now. Because Xi Jinping is not playing around. Not playing around. And you have to wonder, are other countries going to join along with this as well? So we have China, we have Brazil, we have India. Is everyone that's a part of BRICS, are they going to join as well? Is South Africa going to join along with this as well? I mean, what about Mexico? Right? There were talks of Mexico thinking about joining BRICS. So we have to keep an eye on this because China is making moves and taking names. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Sabby, you described Color Me Bad, not All for One. That's right, Color Me Bad. I got the groups confused. Color Me Bad, those were the guys that I saw. Yeah, the guy that looks like Kenny G. I remember that. James says, after Nixon removed from gold standard, dollar had to be forced on others. Lyle says, thank you for the super chat. When I was a kid, the US was the leader of the free world. Now China's the new leader of the free world. And there are some elements now. China isn't perfect. There's criticism to be made there as well. But when we talk about some of the progressive policies that some of us have been fighting for, there are some areas where China has made moves in that, like guaranteed housing for people. We don't have that here in the United States. I would argue that we should, but we don't. Thank you for the super chat, Rob. Speaking of economics, you go ahead and spin this right away. Oh, that's sweet. Thank you, Sabby Sabs. Thank you, Rob. That's so sweet. And shout out to Lyle for becoming a new Sabby member. Give Lyle a big whoop, 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 whoop. Night Gazer says, hello from Mexico. Hello. Love having an international community. Love to hear you guys' take on this. But when we talk about economics and where the US stands right now, you have to think about some of the things that have been happening. And we'll start pre-pandemic, to be fair. The homelessness issue has increased in this country. It was increasing before the pandemic. Some people don't want to mention that, but it was. It increased even more after the pandemic. But that issue has not been resolved. They haven't decreased the rate of homelessness in this country. So there's that. Wages. We still don't have $15 federal minimum wage in this country. People are still making, $7.25 an hour in some states, depending on where you live. Although it has been passed on the state level in certain states, but not all of them and not most of them. So we have a living wage issue still in this country. We have a housing issue still in this country, the homelessness issue in this country. And not to mention, there's the big one, the elephant in the room, that even in 2023, everyone still does not have health care in this country. More and more Americans are leaving the United States. You guys aware of that? More and more Americans are leaving the US and they're moving to countries like Canada and Mexico. They're moving to Europe. They're moving to China. I know people who have moved to China. They're moving to these other countries where they can have some of these progressive needs met. How long will that continue? I don't know. Falsification said, I'm trying to get to Spain. Yeah. Landrew, not only that, the trend is private equity owning 40% of all the housing by 2030. Yes. And you have to remember companies like BlackRock and companies like Vanguard buying real estate, buying houses, single family homes, flipping those homes, jacking up the price and making it more unaffordable for the average American. So when people tell you that we have a housing shortage, I push back on that. We do not have a housing shortage. We have enough housing for everyone. We just don't have enough housing that everyone can afford. And you got to realize companies like BlackRock are part of that. They're a part of that. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Anna. When's the last time anyone saw Biden in person? In this country, I'm convinced he's passed on. Suspect no debates. Oh, when is the last time we saw Biden in person? I don't know. I know he doesn't seem to be all with it. I know that much.